Hey, Sassy Stuff. I'm Emma here with Sierra, and today we're talking about the Oklahoma Sooners, what they're going to look like in 2025. They did have a rough campaign in 2024, a 6-7 record. Venables is in now his crucial year 4, and now is the time. So the Sooners really need to see an improvement here, I think, for him to be justified to stay as the head coach of this program. So they have a brutal SEC slate again. They have a hard non-conference matchup versus Michigan, and they do have a new OC and a new quarterback. So, Sierra, tell me a little bit about this team. How do you feel about the Oklahoma Sooners?
This is definitely the time for Oklahoma to add those new additions. And their new quarterback, John Mateer, who came from Washington State, and his new offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, who also came from Washington State. And he was very helpful in developing Cam Ward, who was the #1 overall draft pick. He eventually ended up transferring to Miami, but did some damage at Washington State. And then John Mateer also was there. Washington State had a great offense. They were really strong in the air raid. And I think that is exactly what Oklahoma needs this year. And they reloaded in the transfer portal too. They've got some great wide receivers like Isaiah Satania, who transferred from Arkansas, and some other guys that transferred from other schools throughout the country. And I think that's super important because last year, Oklahoma was just loaded with injuries. They had 15 scholarship players out. And with Jackson Arnold at the quarterback, who was the quarterback then, transferred to Auburn, I think that it was the reason why Oklahoma struggled so much, just because not only their schedule, but they lacked in the depth department.
Yeah, they definitely did. And Mateer and Arkable, they are saying they're ready to deliver right away. Phil Steele says they have a strong O line, skill players, 37 PPG track record from Arbuckle. So if they can gel early and start generating things on the offense, I think that they could win like shootout games, even against tough SEC defenses. So this is definitely exciting changes that are going on. And then obviously Venables is just known for his defenses. So is he ready to be a top 10 defense nationally? We'll see. They lost some top defensive players. So we're going to see if he can really sustain progress without his key veterans. So I am excited to see how he's going to rebuild this defense this year and if they're able to produce on a very high level, especially with how hard their schedule is this year. So we'll see if they're going to be top 10 in the nation again.
Yeah. And last year, not to keep bringing up Washington State, but they were 12th in overall offense. And meanwhile, Oklahoma's offense was, I believe, 113 when it
Yeah.
comes to their offense. And so it was pretty bad. And this is something that they just have to fix, especially now that it's their second year in the SEC and every single thing counts. Like, you cannot lose those close games, which is something that Oklahoma did quite often last year. They had those upsets like over teams like Alabama, but you have to consistently make those upsets and beat those teams that you're supposed to, not lose the teams that you're supposed to beat, and also beat those teams that are ranked higher than you. And you need to pull off a few upsets too in order to stay alive.
Oh yeah, and if they want to do anything like crazy, like making the playoffs, it is going to be very, very hard road for them. They have so many intense games against Michigan, Texas, Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Auburn. I mean, they're all there. So this is going to be so, so difficult for them to really shine fully this year because of how hard their schedule is. They went 2-6 in SEC play last year. So we're going to see how they do this year. It will be their second year in the SEC. Texas really came into the SEC and showed everybody that, yes, they belong here. And OU, I think, will eventually have that moment in football, but it might take a little bit longer because it is a lot harder here.
Big Ten Media Days was actually pretty recently. And a lot of the Big Ten coaches had some stuff to say, saying, "Oh, well, we'll just go to the SEC schedule and schedule those cupcakes at the end of the year and whatnot." And I was like, "What cupcakes are you talking about?" Like, I mean, starting off with or early in the season with Michigan, and just it continues to get tougher throughout the conference schedule. And that's something that they're really going to have to win on the road, win at home, and just starting off looking at the schedule. I mean, yeah, you start with Illinois State and then Michigan, Temple. Then we get into Auburn. And Auburn is another team that I think that'll be a real fun game because what is it? You get to see Jackson Arnold again. And that'll be a fun matchup. And then it just gets tougher and tougher. I mean, every team that's in this conference this year, I feel like, has kind of leveled up, and there's
Yeah.
really no one that you can count out in this league.
No, and like we had last year about an eight-way race to making the playoffs, to making the SEC championship. I see something very similar happening this year as well, going into November, being really, really tight between these teams like Ole Miss and Georgia and Texas and Alabama. I think this is going to be a really, really tough year, like always in the SEC. But like you said, it's really leveled up. And so we're looking at Venables, who's going into his fourth year, and he didn't do well year 3, 6-7, 2-6 SEC record. He has yet to win a marquee game consistently. His fan patience really might wear thin with another subpar season. So could this be a make or break year for him? Maybe. OU, according to Phil Steele, has a playoff caliber roster, but they just have such a difficult road ahead of them. But I do think if he goes like 8-4 or better with this schedule, it proves he is building something sustainable in Norman. So I think that would secure his job and the faith he or the fans have in him right now moving forward.
Absolutely. And Oklahoma's picked to finish 10th in the SEC. But head coach Brent Venables does not want to finish there. They want to finish higher. They want to make the college football playoff and get Oklahoma back to where they belong. They are a national caliber level program. The SEC, I think, does make it harder for them to get back to where they were when they were dominating in the Big 12 and they were making it to the college football playoff consistently. This conference just cannibalizes each other every single time. And so that kind of makes it harder, which is why I do like the 12-team playoff, just because some of these teams have such a tougher schedule. And I think that they should be rewarded for having a tough schedule like Oklahoma does.
And we're hoping that the committee does take into account this tough schedule that OU has. If they are able to, I would say, be like a 9-3 team, maybe put them in there because of how hard their road has been, even though we saw that last year 9-3 was out of the conversation. So it is going to be interesting to see what the committee does this year, especially with schedules as hard as Oklahoma has it.
Right. And what do you have Oklahoma finishing this year?
I am putting them at 7-5, and we can go through their schedule. And I do think that that is good, with how hard this schedule is.
I'm not trying to copy you, but before we hopped on here, I wrote down 7-5 for Oklahoma
Yeah,
as well. So I think it's
yeah.
yeah, it's hard to break through with this schedule. But yeah, I think they have the opportunity to pull off some upsets. The Texas game, I think that will be a tough one for sure. Um, the Red River rivalry has to swing over to Oklahoma eventually, though, because they cannot let Texas keep winning this. I mean, that rivalry is important to the fans now in the conference. It's transferred over to the SEC now, and they don't want to keep getting beaten up by Texas.
And that is so important, especially, I mean, this year, I think it's going to be so hard to beat Texas. Manning is apparently looking phenomenal. It might be his year, and he might shine and shut down any conversation that Texas is not going to win the national championship over any other team like an Ohio State or Georgia or whoever. But Texas might just be that good this year with Manning. So I think this is not the year for OU winning the Red River rivalry. But moving forward into the next year, Manning goes pro next year or whenever he does. We'll see who the new quarterback is at Texas. We'll see how much money they're allowed to put into that program. And then maybe OU can win back one of those games. But if they pull a huge upset, that's always fun.
The schedule for Oklahoma, definitely brutal, unless you've been living under a rock. They started off pretty easy with Illinois State, which I think is a win.
I
I
agree.
assume that's a win as well. I have them beating Michigan.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I have this one as a loss, actually. I think Michigan did not live up to expectations last year or their own personal expectations. This is Bryce Underwood's debut. They're going to have an elite offense. I do think it'll be a very close game, though. So OU could win, but I am favoring Michigan here.
If Oklahoma does beat Michigan in this game, I think everyone's going to be looking at the Sooners a lot differently because they're like, oh, wow, this team could contend for a college football playoff. And also kind of a great way to stick it to the Big Ten because the Big Ten loves to talk about the SEC so much.
Well,
And I think it'll show the talent on this Oklahoma team, the opportunities that John Mateer has to improve throughout the year, especially if they're beating a team like Michigan early on, and the receivers, the weapons that they got out of that transfer portal shows that it's all clicking super early. So I think the Michigan game can definitely change the story of this team, but it's also not make or break if they lose.
No, and it would give them a newfound confidence going into the season because they have such a gauntlet, especially in that last stretch. So it would definitely help them mentally prepare. But then they go and they play Temple at Temple. I do think this is a win. OU dropped 51 on them last year with a worse offense. So I do think this is a very easy game.
Absolutely. I think Temple is another one. Just one of those games that you kind of have to get under your belt in order to see those mistakes, and maybe even it might not be a great team, but they can highlight those mistakes that you've been making, and I think that's a big deal. And after Temple, then they start SEC play against Auburn, and that one would be an interesting one, I think.
Yeah, again, this one, Auburn is such a wild card team as well because they are building something in the transfer portal with the recruiting, with how they're running that team. So I'm excited to see what Auburn's going to be like this year. So I think this is another game that could go either way. OU does have home field advantage. Jackson Arnold is returning to Norman, so that's going to be very interesting to look at as well. But I do favor OU here. One, because it's at home, and two, because I just think OU's defense is going to overwhelm Auburn this early in the season.
Yeah, Auburn, another team. Hugh Freeze kind of on the hot seat for some people, but Auburn is another team that you have to beat. I think those home games you just have to win,
Yeah.
and especially when it's not a crazy insane like a Texas coming to your town. I mean, Texas doesn't go to Oklahoma, but regardless, I think that that is a game you have to win. It's going to be fun to see their old quarterback back in Norman, and kind of those are always really interesting matchups. And leading up to it, they just have the typical coach and player speak saying, "Well, we just need to execute and keep the main thing." But we want to see, okay, what are you thinking heading into this one? So, but I do think that they do need to beat Auburn for sure to continue that momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. But then they go play Kent State. I do think this is a win. Then they go to the Red River rivalry. So, what do you think about this game?
Well, first off, I hate saying that word. It's like
I
a
do too. I'm like,
Red River rivalry.
slow it down. I talk very fast, and then I'm like, Red River.
Yes, yes, and that is a loss, I think, for Oklahoma because Texas is just a year that they're gonna be back in the college football playoff. So much hype on Arch Manning, like we said, and all of his weapons and the Texas defense and the things that they needed to fix last year and some of the transfer portal additions this year that they've made. And I think that this if they upset Texas, that would be huge for Oklahoma. And personally, I think that they could lose the rest of their games and Brent Venables would be fine. But I think Texas is a lot just because there's just so much with Texas.
Yeah, I mean, Texas, it's going to be a hard matchup for OU to win. Now, OU has a great defense. Venables is a great defensive mind, and Arch Manning is a new quarterback coming in this year. It's midway through the season, so anything could happen. I just don't think that Texas would lose here.
Yeah. And then after playing Texas, they take on South Carolina at South Carolina, which I think could be an interesting one because South Carolina is another team that there's so many teams in this conference this year that are just kind of so close to each other. So the margin for error is tiny. You cannot make any mistakes, but there's lots of hype on South Carolina. Of course, we'll talk about them later. But I think that's a team that Oklahoma drops because it's going to be on the road, intense environment. South Carolina always brings it. Lenora Sellers is another player that's had so much hype. He was a young player last year and really kind of emerged towards the end of the season. And I think that that's going to be a team that South Carolina that will give Oklahoma lots of trouble.
Yeah, South Carolina is looking like they're going to be special this year. Again, I think their schedule is too hard, potentially for them to make the playoffs. But South Carolina is looking to be like a pretty good team, especially because of Lenore Sellers. He's right now on Heisman watch, really early on, but he is there. So I do think that South Carolina will win this game, that OU will lose. So that's where we have it right now. Then they're going to be playing Ole Miss. Now, Lane Kiffin's team is good. OU is going to have home field advantage. I'm wondering with Lane Kiffin, as much as he's amazing at the transfer portal, and he is so good at putting a team together, making them mesh, even though these are players that have never played together before, never grew up in the same system together. I'm wondering if he can replicate what he did last year with Jackson Dart, who's now in the NFL. So that is going to be another team we have a big question mark on, who can be phenomenal and be on playoff watch, but who could drop games like they did last year to teams like Kentucky.
Absolutely. I'm going to say Ole Miss for this game because again, they're a team that can shock you, and there's not enough hype. I feel like for Ole Miss's quarterback Austin Simmons, we know he's young, and he had that impressive drive when Jackson Dart got hurt against Georgia, and that eventually kept the momentum up for the Rebels for them to upset Georgia in Oxford. And so that gives me confidence that this Ole Miss team can pull off those upsets. And this is going to be in Norman and 11 a.m., which it's like, okay, that might not be the rowdiest crowd at
Yeah.
that point, but and who knows where both of these teams are at this time in the season, right? They could both be fighting for a spot in the college football playoff at that point. Ole Miss last year at that time was in that playoff contention to lock until they pooped their pants against Florida at the end of the year. But I'm taking the Rebels here as well.
Yeah. And then we're gonna move on to Tennessee. I'm gonna call this a win for OU. Nico is gone. Tennessee is having crazy articles coming out about them every single day. There's a lot of disarray in that program. I do think it could be a very close game, but I am gonna say OU is gonna win. It's gonna be a gritty win.
Yeah, I think Tennessee will lose at home to Oklahoma. Aguilar, I still don't know enough about him as a quarterback for the Volunteers, to be honest, transferring from Appalachian State. And I think this Tennessee's a tough road environment, though. It's one of the greatest atmospheres in college football. And this is a point that Oklahoma needs to make. Can you win in a tough environment on the road?
And I think if he does, then that's going to help Venables secure his place, both on the team, but also in fans' hearts, that he can win in these very hostile SEC environments, which is not easy. So that'll be a very interesting game, especially for this OU team, to see where they are and what their potential could be moving forward into 2026, even.
And then speaking of tough environments, and well, they have a bye, and then after that they go to Alabama. And playing at Alabama is never easy. That one I do have Oklahoma dropping. I just love that we get this matchup though for the past 2 years because Oklahoma Alabama is usually a matchup that you would see in the national championship or in the playoff and whatnot. But this is something we're getting in the regular season, which I think is so great having Oklahoma in the SEC now. But as we know, Oklahoma beat Alabama at home last year. And so,
Alabama beat themselves.
yeah, yeah, that is true. That is true.
But they did.
Yeah. And so I think Alabama knows that. And they don't want to lose to Vanderbilt. They don't want to lose to Oklahoma. They don't want to lose to anyone, especially after last season where they were left out the playoff and it just wasn't the best year for them. And I think, Kalen DeBoer's second year, and he has a lot to prove as well.
He does, especially after, coming after Nick Saban. That is a hard ask to fill those shoes. So, I mean, you have DeBoer, Simpson, Revenge, and Tuscaloosa. It is going to be tough to win back-to-back years for OU. So I just don't see them pulling this game off, especially because Alabama has something to prove in this game that they were not able to prove last year. This was the game that ultimately knocked them out of the playoffs.
Absolutely. And then up next, they have Mizzou, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on this podcast, but I don't like Mizzou.
We're allowed to do whatever you want.
It's SEC, so it's like I don't really like Mizzou. Maybe it's because they live in Arkansas, and I just don't feel like they belong in the SEC because they're not in the South. And Eli Drinkwitz just always does the craziest stuff, and they get the easiest schedule. We could have a whole podcast maybe about Mizzou, but Mizzou has a cupcake schedule. They always do, and they're going into Norman. And I think but it's weird because they have such a cupcake schedule when they play against a team that's quote unquote better than them. Sometimes they still pull off the upset. And it's like, this isn't fair.
Well,
You
that's
guys
why they were that 8th team still in SEC play or SEC conference championship contention and playoff contention. It was like, really?
Yes, yes, and, like, they play where is this? They played at UMass last year, and they played UMass again, and then they play Boston Col like, they play the most, what's your obsession with the East Coast? I don't understand. The Northeast specifically, the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
But, so I think that Oklahoma's winning that game.
I do too, actually. I mean, Mizzou is they Drinkwitz thinks that they are making the playoffs. They thinks they're making the national championship. I mean, maybe with your schedule, but Mizzou is down offensively. I don't think there's going to be a miracle comeback this year like they had last year. I just think that OU's defense is going to overwhelm them. So I am taking OU to win this game. And then finally, we have LSU. LSU might have their best team yet under Brian Kelly. It is also, this is just going to be a very difficult game, a very hard ask for OU this year, especially going through the entire schedule that they've had to go through. I am just going to call this one a loss, putting them at 7-5.
That is what I have as well. LSU, just lots of hype. Garrett Nussmeyer, it's the year for him to do it as well. LSU fans are kind of, I don't want to say Brian Kelly's on the hot seat, but they're kind of getting like, okay, like the clock's ticking, like we need to do something here. And I also think it's just funny that LSU and Oklahoma are like now rivals because they play each other during, I wouldn't call them rivals, but they play each other during that rivalry week, which is really funny because it's like Oklahoma and LSU, like what's the beef there? But yeah, I do think that that game will be an LSU victory.
Yeah. But I'm looking at them and I'm like, could they make the playoffs? It's a hard ask. It's just such a hard schedule. Now they do have that revamped offense, a top team defense under a seasoned coordinator. Would be fantastic for this team. They only have 3 true SEC road games. If they win just one game from like the Texas, Bama, LSU trio, then the conversation could change. If they win that Michigan game, the conversation would change on this team. So could they do it? Yes, but I think at this moment in time, we know 10-2 gets you in the playoffs. So even a 9-3 OU team, who at that point I would think belonged in the playoffs based on all of the hard games that they were playing. But you have to get 10-2 at this point, and I just do not see them winning 10 games.
Yeah, Oklahoma would have to pull off some of those upsets against those powerhouse teams like the LSU, the Alabama, and whatnot. But tough schedule ahead for the Oklahoma Sooners. But thanks for watching all of this on SEC stuff. And let us know in the comments how you think Oklahoma will do this year. We'll see you next time.